Well, Dr. Emmanuel Gergis is a Coptic Orthodox scholar and the president and CEO of Agora University. He also teaches at the Antiochian House of Studies. And Dr. Gergis, thank you for speaking with us. And I know you're not necessarily speaking or not speaking at all for the entire Coptic Church, but I do appreciate you coming on with us.
Thank you so much, John. It's an honor to be with you. And yes, indeed, my opinions here are personal and scholarly. I'm sure you can seek a church hierarchy's voice on things that are more official.
I appreciate that, and I know we'll still learn a lot from you. So please tell us about the origins of the Coptic Church. How and when did you receive the gospel?
Right. So the Coptic Church is just another term for the canonical Orthodox Church of Alexandria. Now, how we receive the gospel is, tradition has it that we received the gospel through St. Mark, the evangelist. And there are various scholarly opinions on when exactly that happened. Some scholars suggest that it happened as early as 43 AD, while others suggest that it happened all the way as late as 61 AD. Nonetheless, it is the common tradition. And of course, the Coptic Church, or the Church of Alexandria, that is, was the theological leader of what we know as the School of Alexandria, which has the Alexandrian theology. It has the Greek and perhaps also ancient Egyptian school of thought, and had a big role in leading some of the foremost ecumenical councils in Nicaea, Constantinople, and Ephesus as well.
So we use the term Oriental Orthodox sometimes, or sometimes we refer to this tradition and others as the non-Chalcedonian, and I've never been comfortable with any of them, and I would love to know what are your thoughts on how you should be referred to?
Well, I mean, so on an official level, of course, throughout the course of modern dialogue, the phrase Oriental Orthodox has been coined and agreed upon by both families since the 1964 agreements and dialogue. Now, the word Oriental Orthodox, traditionally, if you go back all the way back to the mid-50s and the mid-60s in English literature or English documents that were published, let's say, by the U.S. Bureau or the Census Bureau, you'll find that actually the Eastern Orthodox on paper were referred to as Oriental Orthodox. Now, later on, Metropolitan Anthony Bashir of blessed memory of the Antiochian Orthodox Archdiocese, he had expressed certain reservations about the use of this term. And in fact, I think in one of his church catechism publications that was published, I think, in 1945, he made a very clear statement that that term should not be used to refer to the Eastern Orthodox family. And I think the U.S. government did change that post the 1960s. Now, how did the term Oriental Orthodox come to exist to refer to the non-Chalcedonian church families? Well, that was actually a term that was proposed by the late Father George Florovsky in the 1965, actually he proposed it in 1964, and then it was approved in the 1965 Ethiopia dialogues. And so that's how the term Oriental Orthodox came into existence. We're happy to be referred to as Oriental Orthodox. We obviously did sign that agreement. Now, on a personal level, and that's purely and merely my opinion, that perhaps a more precise phrase that we can use to refer to this family of churches, and this family of churches include the Coptic Orthodox Church, the Syriac Orthodox Church, the Armenian Orthodox Church, the Ethiopian Tawahedo Church, and the Eritrean Church, and of course the Indian Church. This family, abides by the Council of Ephesus in 431. So if you ask me about my personal opinion, I think we should be referred to as Ephesian Christians, like the Chalcedonian family is labeled Chalcedonian. I think we should be labeled Ephesian. But that's a very personal opinion. Nonetheless, happy to use the word Oriental Orthodox because it is the agreement. And I've got to commend Father George Borowski for such a suggestion, because prior to that, certain terms were used like monophysite or, so I really commend him for making that suggestion.
Yes, and I want to get into some of those terms in a bit. So, and that's very helpful and interesting to hear your perspective, because that then implies that the Oriental Orthodox churches, or Ephesian churches as you prefer, is indeed in agreement with the first three ecumenical councils, those in Nicaea, Constantinople, and Ephesus. Would that be accurate?
Absolutely. I mean, we're not just on board, but those councils were in our perspective, they are the basis for the entire Oriental Orthodox outlook, having rejected Chalcedon. So it's our deep faith and commitment in those three that leads us to the rejection in Chalcedon. Yeah.
Well, let's focus in then on Chalcedon. What aspect of that fourth council held in Chalcedon in 451 was troubling to the Coptic Church in particular?
Right. So as you know, like in the council of Ephesus, and I think we should always start there, because if you think about the Council of Ephesus, you're thinking about a council that is agreed upon by both families, right? Would you agree to that statement?
Absolutely.
Right. So our starting point should be there, and our understanding has been that what was accomplished at Ephesus was overturned in Chalcedon. So, in other words, Chalcedon is the negation of Ephesus. And that is primarily because Ephesus, the whole idea in Ephesus was, abolishing the very numerically divided natures of Christ as claimed by Nestorius. And so to come back and go against that would then eliminate Ephesus. And of course, the tome of Leo is one of the central points of rejection in the Oriental mind due to its Christological expression. There are some other elements that I would say contributed to the the troubling, like you called it, right? Which was that the Council of Chalcedon also rehabilitated certain figures like Abbas of Edessa and Theodoret of Cyrus without necessarily receiving any sort of repentance from their part. So there was no repentance. These two were devotees of Nestorius, and the council somehow rehabilitated them without actually them expressing any sort of repentance from their Nestorian beliefs.
So we hear terms like monophysite or monophysite, neophysite, and a couple of hundred years later, monotheletism. Where does the Coptic Church land on those terms? What do you accept? What do you reject?
Right. So, of course, so monophysitism, like monophysite Christology, refers to the Christological perspective that was held by Eutyches. And that is completely rejected by the Coptic Church, by the Oriental churches as well. So monophysitism, which is condemned by the church at large, is not the belief of the Coptic Church or any of the Oriental churches. Now, Miaphysitism is a term that reflects the usage of Saint Cyril of Alexandria's most famous phrase, mea physis tu theologos sarkomeni, or the one nature of the incarnate logos made flesh, right? So that's a different definition than monophysitism. So mea simply means one, whereas mono simply means soul or only, right? So these are completely different words. So we believe in the one the one nature of the incarnate logos, and that is different than monophysitism. Monothelitism refers to the idea of the one will, and this is more of a conversation that is found in the Chalcedonian tradition than in our tradition, because that question comes as a result of the dual understanding of natures in Chalcedon, but that concept does not really pop up anywhere in our theology. Just like, I'll give you an example, just like for the Eastern Orthodox Church, for example, faced a huge issue with icons that resulted in the iconoclastic controversy and resulted in a council addressing iconoclasm. Now, in our church context, dealing with icons was never an issue, so it just never came up, and we never had to address it. Does that?
It does, but let me press the point a little bit about the two wills. And I realize, as we often say, that wasn't our fight. But does Christ have two wills?
Well, it stems from the question: does Christ have two natures? Right. So, and that complexifies the discussion, because do natures have a will, or do persons have a will? Persons do, natures do not do. So you can say, for example, a person is hungry, but you don't say human nature is hungry, right? So action is always done by a person, not a nature. So the question becomes, if a nature has a will, doesn't it make that nature a person? And if that is the case, then would Christ have two persons?
So I was doing a little research, and someone sent me actually a prayer that is prayed just before communion in the Coptic Church. And it used really very similar language found in Chalcedon, without mingling, without confusion, without alteration. So do you essentially mean the exact same thing as the Fourth Council, or do you interpret those apophatic terms differently?
I mean, so it depends really. It depends on, it's not in the reading, it's in the understanding, like we say. And it's how you understand it, John, because I would even go a step further and say even Nestorius himself is probably capable of saying those terms depending on how you define it. if we say that, without mingling, without confusion, without alteration, is it referring to a united nature after the union, like a unitary reality of the person of Jesus Christ after the union? Or are we talking about, two natures that coexist next to each other, but without mingling, without confusion, without alteration? So it depends how, those terms can be used either or. And just like, for example, Arius in Nicaea, he was able to say things like true God from true God, right? But he still rejected that Christ was of the essence of the Father. So simply using terms all has to do with how those terms are being used, how they're being understood.
So, and again, for those of us who are not theologically trained, some may not fully understand what the first three councils affirmed. And so let me just ask you directly, the Coptic Church does accept, affirm, embrace that Christ is fully God and fully man, correct?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So, and again, I know you don't want to speak officially for the Coptic Church, but are you aware of any new understanding or recent factors that would cause maybe the Coptic Church to consider a different way of looking at Chalcedon? I'm trying to see that whole question of words and terms versus meaning, and we'll kind of get to that also when we talk about Saint Cyril. But help us understand some of the conversations that you are a part of about that issue.
Yeah, so again, I think our churches have really advanced the dialogue quite substantially. There have been many attempts of reconciliation, and there were successes actually throughout different points in history. So, for example, there is the Balamand agreement, right, in the city of Antioch between the Syriac Church and the Antiochian Orthodox Church, in which there is a pastoral concession for intercommunion between married couples within the city of Antioch. There is also a similar agreement locally within the city of Alexandria. There are so many. The Joint Commission, that started in the 50s, then 1964, and as recent as 2014, I believe. So there is always room for dialogue. The Council of Chalcedon it is multi-layered. It is, there are political aspects, theological aspects, philosophical aspects, cultural aspects. And some of those have been eliminated just because of human advancement. And so there is a huge ground for us to dialogue today. Now, one of the things that that we could press on and in our dialogue is Chalcedonian Christology in line with the Council of Ephesus? I think this is a very important question to start from in our dialogues. Examining the primary sources, examining the minutes of the councils is very important, because what ends up happening today, in my experience, there are two types of people. There are, the general public who just hear the labels, right? They hear all the monophysites or the diophysites, and these guys are heretics. Oh, these guys are, monophysites, whatever it is. And then there's also the other group that is a little zealous in trying to investigate and trying to get deeper. But what ends up happening is they read modern renditions of opinions. They read regurgitated opinions from other modern scholars that will necessarily use such labels. But very, very rarely will I find people who actually went and read the actual minutes and the actual text of the councils. And this is where the real discussion is. This is where the real data is, because after so many centuries, there is, it's almost like a propaganda machine. Like here, the other group, they're not like us, they're heretics. Many people died. There are a lot of martyrs, there are a lot of persecution. So things take a very emotional and unobjective trajectory, which makes the situation worse, in my opinion. And perhaps we could expand on that if we discuss, what are some productive ways of approaching dialogue. I don't know if we want to venture there or not, but
yes, absolutely.
In my opinion, one of the issues that we face in the Orthodox world at large today, and it's not only Eastern but also Oriental, is we hear a lot of very strict voices about a topic, for example, like the heresy of ecumenism, that we should simply, we're all one, let's get together and let's just, we're all one in Christ, let's proceed and acknowledge one another and reconcile. Everyone is happy ever after. I think even ecumenism needs to be reformed, because true dialogue must rest on true dogmatic, historical, and canonical basis, because none of our families would be willing to dilute our faith just in the name of, unity that is not, a unity that is superficial, that is happening because one of the parties is letting go of the truth. So I think true dialogue must respect the particularities of the other, and it must also avoid the notion of the notion of polemics. Now, it's very easy that theologians sit in a room and become, very combative with philosophical ideas and trying to show, okay, my heritage or my thought is more powerful than yours. This is not the spirit in which dialogue should happen. In fact, this reduces theological work into philosophical work. True theology is one that examines the reality of Christ. And therefore, my proposal for a productive dialogue would be common encounter. Let me give you an illustration. Let's assume there is a German scientist and a Chinese scientist. They're both investigating some new discovery in the human body, and they don't speak to each other. The only way they speak is publishing academic papers that are published in academic journals, and they keep on fighting each other through these papers. I discovered this organ. Here is its position in the human body. And then the other guy says, well, no, you're mistaken, because this part of the human body does not have this organ. And they keep on fighting that way. In order to resolve this issue, the best solution is for those two to meet, let's say, at an academic conference, where one takes the other by the hand and says, well, here we are together. Here is a human corpse, and here is a microscope. Why don't we look under the microscope together, and you show me together where is it that you discover this new organ or new cell or whatever it is. And only then, when both of them stand in front of that reality, can they come to a common understanding of what the other person meant. So in the same way, in the spirit of true dialogue, my proposal would be common encounter. What does that look like? Perhaps monastic exchange. Perhaps a group of monks from the Eastern Orthodox Church would go and live in the Egyptian sketes among Egyptian monks. And a group from the Egyptian sketes would go to Antioch or Russia and spend time with Eastern Orthodox monks. Then they are able to perceive the encounter, perceive the life of prayer, perceive the liturgical life, and see Christ together. Another type of common encounter would be encouraging the laity to go on spiritual pilgrimages to the other countries and witness the spirituality of the people. I recently went to Greece, and I went on a spiritual pilgrimage with some of my Eastern Orthodox colleagues who were theologians. And it was amazing to me how in all the monasteries I entered, I perceived the exact same spirituality that we have in our churches and our monasteries, whether it be the glorification or devotion of the saints, whether it be miracles that happens from the relics of certain saints, so much that can be detected on the spiritual dimension that can lead us to a common encounter and attending each other's liturgical services. There's so much that can be done in the realm of encounter that would then help us in the realm of expression.
That's very helpful. I know, and again, I'm not a theologian, but I have been around people and have managed people for over 50 years. And one thing I have seen, it's quite evident, is that there are two aspects to a disagreement. There is the issue itself, the topic, the subject that has to be explored. Each point has to be carefully and clearly made. But then there is the desire to win. And once that desire to win overcomes the actual issue, you've lost, because now you have to win the argument instead of make your argument clear in a way the other party can understand it. So, Dr. Gergis, Eastern Orthodox and Oriental Orthodox share a common saint and church father in Saint Cyril of Alexandria. We've mentioned his name already. Does that fact shed any light on the Christological differences between the true traditions that perhaps would be starting ground for better communication as you have asked for?
Yes, definitely. I think as we were just talking, John, about, the difference between encounter and expression, having a common saint, why is it that we glorify saints in the Orthodox Church? It's because they lead us to Christ, right? They're icons through their life example, through their union with Christ, and having a common saint. By the way, Saint Cyril of Alexandria is not the only common saint, and that is something that even shows how even after Chalcedon, you have common saints that are celebrated in the Eastern Orthodox Church, even though they are Oriental Orthodox. So, for example, Saint Jacob of Cyril, who is classified in the Eastern Orthodox writings as the doctor of the church in Ethiopian Syriac tradition. Saint Theodora, the empress, Saint Peter the Iberian, Saint Simeon the Stylite. All of these are Oriental Orthodox saints who are also celebrated in the Eastern Orthodox Church. And so, if anything, that shows the validity of my proposal of holding a common encounter and looking at the spiritual realm, which really transcends. I mean, in our shared Orthodox understanding, what is spiritual ultimately supersedes anything intellectual, because intellectualism deals with categories of thoughts, while the spirit and the noetic knowledge supersedes that. It is from the common noetic encounter that we have that we should lead our intellectual discussions, and not vice versa. And so I'm even familiar with a recent recognition of an Oriental Orthodox figure by the name of John Philoponus locally by the Greek Orthodox Patriarchate of Alexandria. This happened as recent as the mid-90s. Having common saints is a true indication of the possibility for a very fruitful dialogue.
Well, then let's talk about St. Cyril specifically, about his views and theology about Christ. What would he have thought? I know he died just prior to the 451 Council. What do you think he would have said or been interested in making clear at that council?
So, St. Cyril of Alexandria uses a very key term. Well, first of all, if we go back to his 12 anathemas, and I will read from what he wrote, he says, if the union of both is genuine, then there are certainly not two in any way, but one and soul from both is how Christ is understood. And later on, in his book, Unity, the Unity of Christ, and also his Christological dialogue on the Incarnation, he uses the words "di theoria moni," or in thought only. So any mention of two natures after the union is can be considered in thought only, so as a theory only, but not in reality, because in reality now the two have become one. Like when we speak of, let's say, the mystery of marriage between a man and a woman, right? They are no longer two, but one, and that becomes the new reality. So, and that's why I really encourage that we look at the works of Saint Cyril based on what happened in the Council of Ephesus and his language there and his works there, which would really bring a lot of clarity to this.
So in your theological circles, which encompasses both Eastern and Oriental theologians, you're teaching at the Antiochian House of Studies, you are engaged in various discussions with theologians on both sides of this issue. What do you hear in terms of the prospects for reconciliation? Do you see any sense of hope? Do you feel any sense of hope? Are we getting closer or farther apart, in your opinion?
Well, ultimately, I see a huge advancement. I mean, if you look at the overall historical timeline of dialogue, I would say we have accomplished in the past few decades what what almost 1400 years were not successful in doing. So I'm very hopeful. And at the same time, we should really engage in a meaningful dialogue, as I mentioned, that takes seriously the Council of Ephesus, that starts with reading together the Theology of St. Cyril of Alexandria, and to really consider also the common encounter. Let us get to know each other. Let us allow the other to express what they believe and not what we project about them. It's very easy for me to look at my Chalcedonian brothers and sisters and say, well, they are Diophysites, right? They are Nestorian. And it's very easy for the Chalcedonian brothers and sisters to look at us and say they are Monophysites. These labels are very easy to put on groups and people. And this happens when we are afraid. We're afraid of exploring otherness. And I think we know our faith. We know what our fathers taught. And it is time that we encounter each other. And, one of the most meaningful things is definitely seeing Eastern Orthodox, theologians, dealing with them in the seminaries, dealing with students from both families who go into different seminaries and discuss together. And, I've seen it often where people walk into a room having a lot of assumptions about the other, and then they start listening instead of projecting certain labels or simply regurgitating what they have read in certain books, and say, well, but are all these people wrong when they call you Monophysites? Okay, so now you're projecting on me a specific language, but where is it that you are allowing me to say, well, here is what I believe, right? There is an important work that was published, I think by Yale, about, a book by the title Coptic Christology in Practice. And one of the things that is being argued there is, well, if you really want to know the Christology of the Copt, go and listen to what they pray in their liturgy. Because in theological circles and in academic circles, we say lex credendi, lex orandi, or lex orandi, lex credendi, which means what you pray is what you believe. And what you believe is what you pray. So if you listen to our liturgical text and hymnology, our midnight praises, which takes 4 hours, right? How is that language expressing our faith? Is it monophysite? And if so, where? Right?
So let's talk about the laity then. What about the non-academic faithful? They go to church, they sit down with each other perhaps over a cup of coffee or tea after liturgy. Is there much thought given to the unity with the Eastern Orthodox at the lay level, or is that kind of let's let our hierarchs and theologians figure that out?
There are all sorts of people. I mean, when we talk about laity, you're talking about a huge spectrum of reactions. From people from the old countries, from Antioch, from Egypt, who don't even see a schism. You have entire families in the East that have cousins who are either Oriental or Eastern, and they're very close, and they get together on Sundays and have lunch and dinner. There are a lot of married couples who live already in unity, and under certain local agreements are allowed to intercommune. Then there are others who are very hopeful for the dialogue. There are others who are very aggressive, voices against any sort of union. So you have a variation of opinions, really, among the laity. However, I tend to see a more charitable, if you will, a more charitable view over the prospect of reconciliation in Eastern communities in the old countries than I see here in North America, and that's perhaps due to perhaps a large number of converts, perhaps, who merely rely on what's written in books and not necessarily, encountering the other persons. Nonetheless, I think on a hierarchical level, I think there's a lot of effort that's being put into dialogue. There are, I know that at least between the Coptic Church and the Russian Orthodox Church, there are a lot of dialogues happening nowadays, and definitely the agreements, the joint agreements since 1964 have been advancing year after year, and you can trace that easily through the signed joint commissions. And we, our desire should be always aligned with Christ, as mentioned in the Gospel of John, of uniting, and his body to be united always.
That should be first and foremost in our minds, for sure. It occurs to me, Dr. Gergis, that part of the complicating factors, many factors are complicated about this, but we're not talking about one church or one local church dialoguing with another local church. We're talking about the Eastern Orthodox. Well, which ones? Russian, Greek, Romanian, Antiochian. We're talking about the Oriental churches. Well, which ones? The Ethiopians, the Copts, the Armenians. So to what degree does that complicate things, and is that something that can be overcome realistically?
On a personal level, honestly, I had great expectations, and I was really looking forward to the potential that the Great Council had, the recent Great Council that was organized by the Eastern Orthodox family. I had very high hopes, and obviously, because of certain circumstances, not all of the Eastern Orthodox churches were on board with that council. And so you're right, because of the diversity of the churches involved, it becomes very hard to unify a voice. There are a lot of modern day politics that would certainly threaten that kind of Eastern Oriental dialogue because of what's happening locally within the two families. Nonetheless, I think having certain advancements on certain grounds. So, for example, referring back to the dialogue that the Coptic Church has traditionally had with the Antiochian Church, for example, and the dialogue that happened between the Syriac Church and the Antiochian Church, our current very advanced dialogue with the Russian Church, I think within each family, if things are aligned, even though this is happening locally or individually between, let's say, the Coptic Church and the Russian Church, well, if the Antiochian Church, the Greek Church, the Romanian Church, if there is a space for local agreements, or if the rest of those members of that family ever get to the point of making it an ecumenical, right, effort, then we can always start from where we finally reached with, let's say, the Russian church. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. And it makes me think of another question because, as we talked about the Council of Chalcedon in 451, there were specific terminology used there. There were documents that now the Eastern Orthodox Church has kind of codified and said, this is our church. We are the church of the 7 ecumenical councils, and this is what we believe. So it makes me wonder, given the what you had earlier articulated as the concerns about Chalcedon undoing Ephesus, what happens to that council? And does it have to be rewritten, in your opinion, or amended? How can we get around that?
No, that's, and I know that's a question that a lot of people have, because a lot of the North American, I would label, North American view of ecumenical councils is a little distorted, because people confuse a few things, and I want to unpack that theologically. And I am willing to bet that my Eastern Orthodox, theologians and colleagues would agree with me on this. There are 2 elements. Number one, the faithful on both sides must distinguish between the doctrine of a council and its canons. So a canon can be reversed, right? So one council can come after another council and nullify or amend the canons that preceded it. So canons can always be changed. However, doctrines, this is where we say they cannot be changed. So the question becomes, when we're looking at Chalcedon, if we understand the doctrine behind it, and if we agree that the doctrine in Chalcedon rests upon the doctrine of Ephesus, but is then poorly articulated in the form of the canon, then we are able to say, well, let us change the expression, let us change the canon and maintain the doctrine. That's the first argument I'd like to make. The second is that there is no necessity, there is absolutely no necessity in upholding the subsequent councils as ecumenically binding. What do I mean by that? There were a lot of councils that were held locally to address certain local issues that arose and only apply to certain geographical locales. So when we're speaking about, again, I refer back to the example I gave about iconoclasm. When iconoclasm was an issue, there was a council that dealt with this. But this issue, this controversy, was not applicable to all churches in the world. They were only contextual to a specific set of churches. So there is space for saying, well, the subsequent councils after Chalcedon can be viewed as local councils and upheld by the churches that had such necessities within their context.
Thank you. That's a helpful clarification. So anything else, Dr. Gergis, that you would like to say on this matter? You've been very generous with your time, so I appreciate it.
Thank you, John. I know it's quite an honor. And from your perspective, you made a distinction earlier about the distinction between there's the scholarly and the laity. From your point of view of laity, how do you see dialogue developing?
Well, we're observers, right? There's not a thing we can do personally to advance this or to delay it. So I think what we can and must do always is pray for unity. I mean, this is very clear from our Lord. This is what he wants. This is what he desires. And it's not unity at any cost. We don't say where we are in communion, with the oneness Pentecostals, because there are doctrinal things there that prohibit that clearly from doing that. But we pray for unity with all Christians because it's what Christ asked for us. It's asked of us. So I think that's the limit of, what I could say on that as a layperson. I'd be really nervous about projecting anything additional to that.
And do you see any space for common encounter?
I always see space for common encounter. I love, and the very reason that the heart behind this project is common encounter. I think we have lost the art of common encounter because of the internet. We have become Christians who fight. And not all Christians, but the internet makes it really easy to fight. And so, and again, as I said earlier, it becomes the argument rather than the issue that is at stake. And I need to win. I need to slam you into the ground with my thoughts and not be respectful in listening. So, I mean, that's really what my heart is for what we're doing here, and I pray that others will attempt at least to establish a similar spirit.
Absolutely, and in the spirit of what you just shared, I'd like really to extend an invitation to all our viewers to perhaps visit the Egyptian monasteries in the Skitis and visit the monastery of St. Macarius. Visit all the monasteries in the Egyptian Skitis and see. I mean, these monasteries were established way before the whole Chalcedonian issue, and there's a lot of heritage there, a lot of manuscript. The monastic life is still well and alive, and that would be a way to encounter that tradition.
It would be an encounter and an enrichment, I might add. And I couldn't agree more. The more we can learn from each other and appreciate the piety and spirituality of both traditions, the better off we'll be.
Yes, indeed. And I actually like that very much. I very much appreciate and see that common encounter in other ways. In the recent years, I've seen St. Vladimir Press publish a couple of books about the lives of some of our, modern day saints, like the silent patriarch who spoke, the sticks in our Coptic tradition. There are also books published. Spiritual books that were published by St. Vladimir Press, like by Father Matthew the Poor, and as well as Pope Shenouda. And so that really opens up a lot of the theological, the spiritual richness that we can. And I know for sure on our bookshelves as well, we have a lot of the Eastern Orthodox theologians and their spiritual experiences as well.
Well, Dr. Emmanuel Gergis is our guest, and he is a Coptic Orthodox scholar, president of Agora University, and he also teaches at the Antiochian House of Studies. And again, Dr. Gergis, you've been very generous with your time, and I really appreciate you joining us.
Thank you so much, Phil.